Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Matthew Smith. I'm the CTO of Software AG for Northern EMEA, APJ and South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us on this call. We're here in the UK. It's 12:30 and I think the rain has just stopped outside. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Nick Alexander, who, as a CEO of DPG, I can't believe that I've managed to persuade you to spend some of your time to sit next to me, and I very much appreciate you doing so.
Thank you, Matt. Likewise, good to be here.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in a moment, because I think quite a few people on the call and will be listening to this as a digital recording later on might be wondering why on earth you have an opinion and why we should be trusting some of the things you say. It's worth mentioning that I'm not a lawyer. We're going to be talking about legal matters. You're not a lawyer either from this perspective, but we both have a lot of experience. You have a great deal of experience in this field. But if I could ask you to introduce yourself to our listeners and why we should be listening to you, really, as we start this conversation.
Matt, thank you. So I've been involved in banking law, in governance, risk and compliance for 25 years, so clearly a very heavily regulated industry. Not just in the UK, in here, Asia, South America. So I've dealt with lots of regulators and I've seen lots of law get passed, and I've had a specific interest in the last 10 years in data protection and what corporates do when they suffer a data breach.
Okay, so data breach is all over the news. We see an awful lot about that happening everywhere from all sorts of different angles. But we're going to focus in a little bit on GDPR and what that actually means, because some people are unsure, so I'd like to get into that during our conversation, but also talk a little bit more widely around data protection, as you've just mentioned, because I think, from what I understand, GDPR is a subset of data protection as a really big issue that we're all going to be facing. But you know, before we kind of really jump into some of the meat of this, I'm going to ask some questions. Now, the questions are going to appear on the screen for our listeners, and for those watching in the future, you can see those questions as well. Now, GDPR, I don't know about you, Nick, and for those of you on the call, I probably get 4 or 5 emails a week offering me all sorts of wonderful, magical solutions to this new GDPR thing. And I'm really unsure about the validity of all of those things that are being offered to me. So can we just explore a little bit about this GDPR thing? It's just another regulation, right? Isn't it? Like we talked about in the finance sector, you come from banking, I can probably just put aside a bunch of money and pay the fines, it'll be all good. So tell me a little bit about this GDPR thing. You know, what kind of a catalyst is it for?
Yeah, sure. So I think let's answer 2 questions here. So yes, it's another law. However, it is the long-awaited, much negotiated successor to the previous 98 Act. The difference is this one has teeth. I think this is the most significant rewrite of business law that I've seen in my career, and I'll be surprised if it actually surpasses that, because the scope is enormous.
So the most significant rewrite in your career, I mean, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. I'm kind of half expecting people to imagine this is going to be flipped. You know, can't we wait another year? I mean, surely the ICO will say, do you know what, this is too difficult. It's such a big rewrite.
I think hoping is a dangerous position. The law permits no grey. It's black or white. It's binary. You either are compliant or you're not as of May next year. And in terms of the regulatory position on this, you've been given 2 years' notice of this. It is the successor to the 98 Act, and you were surely complying with that, weren't you? So this isn't too difficult.
Right, okay. Obviously some pretty worrying things. Can you help me understand a little bit of GDPR? Just a headline for those of you who are not familiar with GDPR. Could you just help me understand a little bit about this rewrite? A little bit more about GDPR itself. What is it?
Yeah, sure. So this is the piece of regulation which has some 50 mandatory articles. Those are requirements. Not please consider, or you should think about, you must do the following. It has significant implications for businesses in terms of demonstrating robust business practices around the issue of protecting data, and it firmly enshrines the rights of data subjects and the compensation and the measures they can actually progress to actually take action against a data processor or controller for losing their data. This has huge implications for business.
So you mentioned the teeth,
yes,
which I'm sure we'll come to a little bit later on. But for now, I'd just like to move on to my second question as we start to dig into this a little bit. Now, obviously, as a regulation, it's enshrined in law, was the phrase you used. It has to be adhered to. The regulator has teeth, which we'll come to in a moment. As a professional in this industry, can you kind of help me understand what you see in general people do wrong when it comes to compliance with this kind of regulation, and indeed data protection is a more broad subject?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've seen lots of compliance in banking. The issue generally with compliance, I think, is, well, there are three things. It starts and ends with a policy document. That's not good enough. Everyone knows operations flex from policy. Operations will decide to do something differently on day one, and that may continue for weeks or months afterwards in order to derive a particular outcome. I think boards generally are not aware of the extent to which operations flex from policy, and they're quite scared and actually show them the proof that actually you're not doing what you think you're doing. So secondly, issue with compliance is it's the image. Your compliance strategy is not as sexy as your big data strategy or your optimization strategy to drive your revenue curve at 5%. So it's not sexy enough to get the interdepartmental buy-in to make the strategy succeed, but it needs to, because compliance is ever increasing. It's very hard now to find an organisation that hasn't got an expanding compliance department.
So I think this compliance, you talk about an image projected into the market. I think that one of the things I see talking to professionals in this area is that there seems to be a greater interest in this because it actually affects every one of us personally as people, because we're all customers of companies in some respect. And the idea that they're not protecting my data personally bothers me. And I'm sure it bothers everybody that's listening to this call. So compliance is more than just being compliant and an image for a company. Surely this goes all the way down to retention of customers.
Absolutely right. I think a very good point. As consumers, we're now more aware that actually it's our data. It's not the organisation's data. They're using it. They've got a duty actually not just under the law, but actually to their shareholders to ensure they're protecting the data because of the enforcement action that could follow a data breach. It is your data, and organisations have to slowly understand that. Actually, they need to safeguard that. Yeah. And GDPR enshrines the rights of a data subject to actually sue the processor or controller for a data breach.
So, again, back to this, what organisations get wrong with compliance. Okay, so you've given me the start of an idea, but surely can't I just, one of these emails I get every week usually offers me some kind of technology database thing. I kind of just throw technology at this.
It's not a bad start, but it's far from the panacea, because in order to be compliant requires a demonstration of your business culture. Privacy by design is a phrase used in the law, and someone joked recently, only a lawyer could actually think of a phrase like that. What does it mean? It actually means you must demonstrate that privacy cascades through the whole organisation. So that means away from tech, it's understanding your business processes, it's training for your staff, and other important factors, all of which contribute towards having a robust operational platform. So it's not just being compliant, having a document, it's actually about demonstrating and understanding where your data breach risk is within the business. And that is often away from the technical front line.
Okay. But then from what you say there, if I train all my staff, I'll do that this year. I'll put some technology in place. Yeah. I'll be compliant next year, which there's a pretty big date, right? I mean, when's the date next year?
It's May 25th.
May 25th next year. So slightly less than a year away. I'll pass the compliance. I'm all good, right? I'm okay, Nick. That's it. We're done.
Yeah, sadly not. Compliance is often seen as annual snapshots. With data protection, you've got an ongoing compliance requirement. So it's now, before the law is changed next year, replacing the 98 law, an ongoing requirement to actually demonstrate that you are compliant in many aspects of your business. So, for example, under the GDPR rule, you must actually inform upon yourself of a data breach within 72 hours. Unless you've got your fingers on the pulse of your business, how would you know, for example, you suffered a data breach? So this compliance snapshot, which could be rare, monthly, annually, is not sufficient.
Okay, that's quite important, because the last thing people want to do is find out they've got a data breach by watching the news.
As
often happens that they realise that it's their company that's being talked about. Okay, so let me move on to my third question as we explore this a bit further, please, Nick. So look, I think as a technologist, I understand a little bit about protecting data, but you've been doing this for decades, if I may. Tell me a little bit about why, in your professional opinion and those that you've interacted with, that protecting data is just such a challenge. I mean, surely it should be easy, right? We just encrypt everything. So
yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
So let's look at the environment. So working practices have changed. You've got home workers. That is a potential huge source of data breach. What are they accessing at home? What are the access credentials and for how long? Staff do silly things, they use memory sticks. You've got a change in the environment. You have an environment where BYOD, always on mobile. You've got organizations that know your whereabouts after you left a cab. You've got big data strategies. Simply data is fluid, it's everywhere, and it is particularly hard to actually track and understand which of your apps, servers, devices actually have data and the nature of that data. So data is everywhere, it's fluid.
So give me some numbers, though. I'm a science guy. You know, I like numbers. So talk to me a little bit about some of the numbers that you've got behind these changing trends and the data breaches and things like that. What do you see professionally?
That's a good question, actually, because I think any security vendor finds a stat supports their own use of tech. So let's just look at data breaches generally. They're growing at 90% since 2009, compound growth rate. There were a known 4.2 billion lost records last year. That's known. We are privy in DPG to the ones you don't hear about, which are happening every single day in FTSE 100 firms and below. So you've got a very motivated regulator designed to actually start protecting this data.
I think it's an important point is that some of the things that I've obviously shared with you privately, under contract, behind closed doors, it's a lot worse than I realised. There's a lot of things that are kept quiet, and rightly so in many respects, as we try and deal with these things, some of them malicious, some of them accidental. But your opinion you've expressed all of us here is that it's a fundamental challenge that's not going to go away, and it's growing.
It is most definitely, yeah. The problem is not going away. You've got a particularly aware consumer base now. Your customers want assurances of what you're doing. You've got regulators. You've also got the spectre of lawyers. That could be the spectre in the room. As a result of fast evolving data breach law, you can now sue for emotional distress for data breach. That means non-monetary harm. You've lost my data. Yes, it's synthetic. You can't touch it, but it's my data. You can now sue for emotional distress.
It's, I think I can see an entire industry being born, a bit like PPI. Have you suffered from a data breach recently?
Quite possibly, man. I think every law firm globally of significant size is gearing up heavily in the area of data breach remediation, and with a very strong commercial eye upon the lawsuits.
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so let me talk to question 4. So we're getting to some real practical stuff now, right? In the regulation, from what I understand, there's this thing called a DPO, which is a job role, from what I understand, looking at the text. Talk to me a little bit about this job role, what it is, and what makes a good one, and what perhaps makes a bad one. So what is this new role?
Yeah, I'm sure. So the law goes into detail about the skills and requirement for a DPO.
What is a DPO?
It's a data protection officer.
Right.
And the law is not terribly clear that if you process data on a large scale, you need a DPO. The law makes use of fair and appropriate and proportional. So it's for you to actually work out whether, given your particular business, your threat vector, you should actually have a DPO. Pretty fair to say that for everyone listening today, you need a DPO. This person's a big hitter. Direct reporting lines to the board. They're supposed to understand data protection law. They're a business process expert. So that implies Prince 2, Six Sigma. They're also responsible for compliance. They've got some compliance experience as well. There is no degree in being a DPO, for starters. So there's a massive fundamental issue here, which is actually that we think 75,000 are required as of next May. These people do not exist.
75,000 people?
Yes, correct.
To be data protection officers?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a pretty serious set of job openings available in the industry.
It's a good point, but I think the world's headhunters combined couldn't fulfill the requirement. These people do not exist. Prince 2, Six Sigma, a business process expert, a lawyer once more, a coordinator, a compliance officer. It's a very stringent requirement under the law.
I can see the opportunity for a lot of people to make a lot of money out of being data protection officers because it's going to be such a scarce resource. So if it's going to be a really scarce resource, Nick, again, professionally, what on earth do we do if we can't get hold of a data protection officer?
Yeah, I think so. Many of the world's law firms are offering a synthetic DPO. That might be a good start. But again, the regulator will say, well, actually, I've seen your accounts for last year. You're using an external lawyer. You should have in-house counsel, shouldn't you? So I think it's the one part of the law that actually wasn't terribly well thought through. There's a fundamental gap in the market, and it needs to be fulfilled. I think, and it will take some time to catch up. So organizations will scramble trying to find a person who's got a subset of those skills to actually suggest to a regulator, we're taking this seriously, this is the best we can do. It's one particular problem with the law.
Okay. So you've obviously met and interacted with people that are going to make good data protection officers. Give me a little bit of colour on the skill base. You've mentioned some sort of areas of expertise around Six Sigma and law and so on, but obviously you meet these people. If you met somebody tomorrow, you'd say, wow, they're going to be a brilliant data protection officer. What kind of character are we looking at?
It's somebody who's tenacious, they've got grey hair, they're going to be older. In order to demonstrate the skills of the regulator, as required by the law, you have to have these, not have to have, but probably have got credentials like Six Sigma and Prince 2. You're a good communicator. You understand business process within your business. So you're not mapping blindly to the law, it's actually understanding the wider requirement to protect data and to actually let a regulator, the body, know actually how you are doing with respect to that. So this is someone tenacious, with a broad range of skills.
Okay. I still can't get over the fact that there's going to be 75,000 job openings as a potential in this space. I think it could be that companies try and promote within and hopefully find a subset. But obviously they're going to have to get advice as well as to which subset and which kind of person is likely to want this kind of career.
That's right. You come from within, they can have other job roles that they cannot be interfered with. When they say jump, you do say how high. They can't be dismissed for performing their duties. So this is someone who actually has got gravitas in the business and is recognised as such.
So that makes it a bit more complicated because there's potential conflicts of interest. If you try and promote, say, an existing COO into that position and they try and dual role, then that's likely not to work.
Yep, they're autonomous.
They have to be autonomous.
Yes.
Okay, that's a bit more difficult then.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right. Well, let me park that question. If anybody on the call has got questions, please raise them via the chat panel, and we'll either get around to them if you've got time at the end, or we'll be answering them on email. But if I could move on to my next question, and then we're going to go into sort of more general discussion, please, Nick. So my fifth question is around a more deep topic, and this is, okay, so let's fast forward ourselves to the 25th of May next year. We've got this regulator. Who is the regulator, for example, in the UK? I mean,
yeah, so the ICO, the Information Commissioner. So this is the government-appointed regulator, and the lady is Elizabeth Denham.
Elizabeth Denham.
She's the previous Canadian Commissioner in the same capacity.
So she's done this sort of thing elsewhere in other countries.
She knows what she's doing.
Right. Okay. So if we've got this lady who's going to be leading the charge, if you like, for the ICO in the UK as an example, but it will happen in every country in Europe, right?
Correct.
Okay. So what kind of strategy would you be comfortable with as a professional in this space to be put in place before the 25th of May? Or do I just wait until the 25th of May? I mean,
no, I think, again, if you wait until then, you're playing with fire. The law does not permit negligence. I'd certainly be cautious if I had any shareholders who were aware of the subject, because if you have a data breach and your fans have been negligent, I think they'll call for your head. Somebody will get fined for a data breach. Corporates don't accept, we hoped, we thought about, but didn't do. The law tells you quite clearly what you must do. And it's quite surprising how everyone's got an opinion. I've got an opinion, Matt, you've got an opinion. The only opinion that matters is actually that of the regulator. And she's saying, in the UK this is, make no mistake, this gives us a very big stick. Compliance is not a box-ticking exercise. You must demonstrate a data protection framework. Now, the law doesn't say what a framework is. It leaves you hanging, but you can deduce what that means with some intelligence and actually reading the law properly. one of the ICO's lawyers also said recently, if you suffer a data breach, the best way of encouraging us not to delve deeper is to show us your data protection framework or program. That does not mean showing a policy document. They're wise to that. They even call it policy dust syndrome. That's Benham's quote, not mine. So you've got to throw bodies at this, be aware it's actually a people, process, and technology issue. You will not become compliant by mapping to this law and taking these articles very literally, but thinking outside of that, thinking actually if we suffer a data breach, your objective is to actually get them out the door as quickly as possible. So again, it's not pleasant when they investigate. They've got all rights access to your business, your staff, they ask questions. You've actually got to satisfy them, you've actually taken this seriously, and you may be in a better position showing your plans, but perhaps you can't do X until 2018 because of resource issues, because you're not fined for data breach per se.
Right.
You're fined for actually not doing anything about it, or being negligent or culpable.
I see. So having a strategy in place is critical.
Absolutely.
Even if you haven't been able to meet the timelines, you have to show you've got a strategy.
Yeah, they're pragmatic. There is no email post-breach saying why the funds to the ICO, which goes to the Treasury incidentally. It's not like that. You must demonstrate your plans and the action. So if you've begun your clear remediation, that's actually a good start.
Right.
But again, looking at these technical solutions, that's just part of it. It's actually about your processes, your culture, in areas away from GDPR.
Okay. Now, the thing is, Nick, let's be kind of blunt about this. Right? Regulations have come along in the past. You know, yeah, we've seen some people being made an example of, but I've certainly got examples. I won't name names, but I've got examples of companies that have deliberately put aside budget to pay fines because it's just too difficult and too expensive to be compliant with the regulation. They just budget for the fines. I'm sure none of us listening know anybody that would do that. I mean, it's, you know, God forbid. But surely that could be a strategy, couldn't it? I just put a few $100,000 to one side and it'll be all right.
Not anymore. So the fine is the headline grabber. Everyone said it's 4% of turnover. So the maximum fine is 4 points to your global turnover for a data breach. That sounds like a broad brushstroke. Let's just backtrack slightly. Under the current law, the 98 Act, the fine's £500,000. So TalkTalk's fine £400,000, for example. But as could be seen from that, the share price impact was £3.50 to £1.70, so massive disruption of shareholder value. So if that fine was now £5 million, or multiples of that, many organisations like yourself have actually knowingly been non-compliant because the cost is actually too great. But at 4 points of turnover, that certainly shows intent. Now, no one can foresee with any accuracy how aggressive a regulator might be, but somebody's going to actually find out. But the devil's in the detail. The articles in the law go into the Tier 2 offences. So Tier 1 offences are 4%, and Tier 2 offences are 2%. So, for example, a failure to report the skeleton facts of a breach within 72 hours is a 2% fine. So this is clearly a very carefully thought out, well-considered and modelled law where they've scenario tested for this kind of breach, is that a 2% fine or a 4% fine? So I'd say for any organisation thinking this won't happen, I think you're hoping.
But hang on a minute, if there's Tier 2 offences, could I have multiple Tier 2 offences?
Yes, you can. So the fine can only be 4% maximum, but your twos can add up to 4. Yes.
Okay, so they've essentially got a way of getting me even if I think I'm only Tier 2 and it's minor.
Quite right.
All right, okay.
And incidentally, the insurance sector is also pushing back on claims. They're getting wiser to business process weakness that is not hacking resulting in data breach. So the insurance sector is now pushing back on claims saying, no, you were actually stupid, we don't cover that.
Right.
So WannaCry is a good example. The attack vector was technical, but that was a known vulnerability. So the insurance sector is saying to those claimants, no, you chose not to do this.
It's like notification of a pre-existing condition.
Absolutely.
Right, it's a pre-existing vulnerability that was known. You've deliberately chosen not to do anything about it.
Yes.
And the burden is upon you as an organisation to prove that you either didn't know about it or that you have actually done something about it. Either way, they're probably going to get you.
Yes.
So this ICO and this lady Elizabeth, she's obviously got form from the past, working in Canada and doing this in other countries. That's just the UK. Is this just a European problem? I mean, I'm an American company. Why would I have a protection strategy, to my question, if I was an American company?
You know, we mentioned earlier that the scope is enormous. The catch-all, the litmus test is if you process the data of a European Union citizen, that includes your employees, then you are bound by this law. So interestingly, in America recently, heard some American corporates say, well, that's just you Europeans in GDPR. We'll do it this way. You can't. You're bound by this law. So irrespective of controlled function or incorporation domicile, if you process the data of a European Union citizen, you're bound by this law. Hence, the scope is enormous.
Wow. Okay, that's a bit more worrying.
Yes.
So let me just summarise some of the things that we've talked about for everybody on the phone. Right? The regulator has got teeth. I think this is probably one of the first times in my career I've seen a regulator with the ability to fine and being very verbal about that ability to such an extent. It's really very aggressive fining structure. There's tier 1, tier 2 fines, which means that even if I think I'm going to get away with it by doing minor things wrong, actually the minor things are going to get caught as well. You have to put in a data protection officer, which is a skilled, difficult role to employ for or promote within. If you promote within, they have to separate that responsibility from the current job that you're doing. So it's an autonomous role.
That's correct.
There's going to be 70,000 odds, we've roughly calculated, people that are going to need to be in place. So the first movers are going to be the winners, right? Because this is going to be a limited talent pool available to the European and non-European organisations.
That's a shrewd move.
So moving quickly is pretty important. In fact, if you're not moving already, considering we've now got less than a year, only slightly less than a year, but less than a year, you probably really ought to be thinking about this. So if you're on this telephone call listening, you're actually doing something about it. Good job, well done. But for those others, perhaps tell your friends and colleagues this is actually quite serious.
It's very serious. And I think organisations actually need to mature. Compliance, protecting data seen as a business inhibitor. Actually, customers increasingly want assurances around your position around protecting data. So it should be seen more maturely to actually grow from this, demonstrate your, not just compliance, but actually your touch points to consumers. We actually do care about this, because I think the ramifications could be considerable if you don't.
So I'd like to kind of start to wrap towards the end of my conversation with you, Nick. I'm a very practical man, and I'd like to get a little bit practical here. Right? In most organisations, finding budget to take on a task as difficult as the one you've outlined is notoriously difficult. Typically, either the budget's not been put in place already, or it's larger or more difficult than I expected. So do you see, as a professional in this space, that there's an opportunity to wrap up the search for GDPR compliance and better data protection into other projects, into other innovations, into other improvements in process?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think organisations are struggling because they look at GDPR and ask, where do I start? Well, where you start depends on actually where you are right now. So instead of launching into expensive consultancy with the advisories, who'll give you gap analysis, I think start to actually understand your as-is business position right now, right, in order to actually build that framework going forwards, because you might be quite good already as a result of compliance with the old law. So I think you could have a good starting point. So I think practically, yes, you've actually got to understand who are your business process owners and what do they do for you in respect of protecting data. Right. Because your objective is actually not to map to law, it is just another law, but the objective is to protect data.
Okay, and in turn, protect your image, protect your money,
absolutely,
protect your bottom line, protect your staff, your share price. I mean, it's
protect your job.
Protect your job, absolutely, yeah, and keep you out of jail. Because yes, I can imagine some people going to jail if they deliberately do these sorts of
yeah, there are some MPs vocally calling for prison sentences,
right, for
directors of breached organisations who are found to be culpable.
Yeah.
Harsh in my opinion, but there is a hardening of the stance towards this globally.
Well, and, we've seen some data protection issues with releasing of public, private data into the public actually cause really quite serious problems. I mean, some people have lost their lives over these sorts of breaches. So we all need to take it very, very seriously. Okay, so let me just pop back to this strategy thing. So I think I'm getting a bit of a better picture now. So understand your current position, your as is. Hopefully you're in a reasonably good position because of previous law compliance, but you need to start asking yourselves some important questions, yeah, as an organisation. Can you give me kind of a flavour? Don't reveal everything.
No, sure.
But what are the questions?
It's fairly disconcerting meeting large corporates where the IT guy says, it's my project. It's not your project. This involves every department, in fact, every member of staff in the organisation, because it's a collaborative effort. Chucking revenue at more widgets will not make you more compliant. It might reduce your risk slightly, but will not make you a better organisation in terms of protecting data. So I think it's an interdepartmental strategy. Everyone has to do something, not some do all. So, for example, your staff or your front line in your defence to protect data, they're also your greatest vulnerability. It's about improving training as well, improving culture. So, for example, in banking, when you're inducted, you get fairly intensive training on data protection. In other industries do, I'm not sure if you do, there should be actually a very robust training schedule, and it should be repeated often. Because in most data breaches, you find actually human error is the root cause. Right. Hacking gets the headlines. For most organizations, it's not nation-state hackers. You're not being hacked by foreign intelligence services. It's actually business process weakness, your internal failure, allowing a data breach to actually happen.
Okay, so from a strategy perspective, we should have very quickly internal meetings, but perhaps seeking external advice as part of that to checkpoint where we are in GDPR and also part of the wider data protection discussion. Make sure that I've got a plan in place for a DPO, data protection officer, in some shape or form. Even if I'm not from the European Union, understands my risks of operating in the European Union and processing my own staff's data and my customers' data. Make sure I understand what kind of questions to ask, and I think I'm going to come to that a little bit in a minute as I wrap up the WebEx. Technology can help, but understands how and what kind of technology. But again, taking advice matters in that sort of space. Understand that this regulation can't be ignored, shouldn't be ignored, contains significant fining opportunity, with MPs calling for prison sentences, likely, for serious breaches. The regulator in certainly the UK, but I understand in other countries as well, is taking this extremely seriously, and I've heard are not likely to let you slip when it comes around to that really important date. Okay. Have I summarised pretty well?
You have that very well. I think added complexion is actually, there are 28 regulators. So you might find as a UK corporate, you're dealing with actually the Belgian regulator. The Belgian regulator's got quite a tough stance. They've lost a very public spat with Facebook over privacy. They're gunning for a scalp. So you've actually got inter-European complexities to this as well.
Right. So talking about inter-European complexities, yes. Obviously I'm British. One of the things I have heard somebody say is, don't need to worry about it because after Brexit, we won't need to worry about it anyway. Right? I mean, we're on our own. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so let's be clear. The litmus test is if you process the data of a European Union citizen. So in the example of us exiting with Brexit, you're still processing the data of a European Union citizen. You will have a Belgian, Dutch, German customer or employee with that, of course, in it. And to make it quite clear, Theresa May committed the UK to GDPR when she took office. So there is no prospects of this just might go away.
Right. So with all of that said, I'm, I guess, a little bit more worried than I was at the start of the conversation, but I'm also a little bit more positive that there are people out there thinking quite carefully, and have been for quite a while, about the challenges that are ahead. Now, I know for our listeners, you're a CEO, so the opportunity for everyone to just pick the phone up and speak to the CEO of a corporation is just very unlikely with your diary. But in terms of how do I get advice? How do I work within your advice and your corporation's advice? What do we do as listeners to try and get some of the detail behind this?
Sure, thanks. I think the important thing is actually, it looks scary, but it's a course of action. The battle to protect data actually can be won. You don't need to be petrified of these fines, you can actually take some steps now. So thanks, Matt, through working through Software AG. We have different resource. You'll find we're able to actually coordinate the effort. So please work through Software AG with your particular contact points, and I'm sure we can actually make a difference to this particularly thorny issue in the market.
Okay, so just to be clear for everyone, working through Software AG, you're willing to help with some of the advice through Software AG to our listeners, and perhaps give a measure of practical guidance in the future.
Absolutely, Matt. There's lots of noise in the market, and the noise is wrong. There are some steps to be taken to actually address this risk.
But I like the sound of that. That alleviates some of my deep concern, and also as a citizen, my concern with other companies not dealing with our data properly. I'm worried about it, and so I don't want my banking details to be leaked online, right? I mean, we've all got a personal story, right?
We do.
It's very generous of you, and I very much appreciate what you've done, certainly working already with Software AG to offer your heartfelt advice and guidance to our teams. It is a thorny issue, but as you say, one that we can deal with. It is important to understand that there's practical steps to be taken. Now, this WebEx is obviously not to go into the detail behind the scenes of all of the advice and guidance and so on, because that's really up to you as listeners to decide what you wish to do to take advice and perhaps leverage some sage guidance from somebody who's been doing this for a very long time. So I really appreciate your time. It's been very valuable talking to you. I've learned a few things. I hope you have on the line as well. Now, you can see on the slides that if you wish to have a little look about the starting point, as you say, where do I start is a really important question. Perhaps you've already started, but you want to catch up a little bit. If you go to a microsite that we've set up for you as listeners, it's gdpr.softwareag.com. That will take you to an area where we've used some of our own money. We've paid some analysts working with the likes of yourself to help try and gather some of the advice into one place for you as listeners to go and take that data and have a little look. Likewise, you can also contact us simply as contactus.uk@softwareag.com, and we will take care of your questions directly. So I'm just going to check with the call invigilator to see if we've got too many questions. So we've got quite a few. Okay, so do you mind if we take those separately and we'll send out to, okay, so thank you very much for the questions. We will absolutely commit to get those looked at with you, Nick. We'll do that after this call, and then we'll come back to those individuals that have raised the questions directly. I appreciate everyone's time for listening, and for those of you who listen to this as a recording in the future, I say hello to your future selves. Thanks once again, Nick. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt.